Today is, I think, a very important day for all of us. 65 years is not a small period in the life of an institution. And first and foremost, I must thank all of you who have kept the torch of central banking alive and well in Sri Lanka over the last 65 years. I know most of you haven't been here for that length of time, but certainly those traditions, I think, have been passed on to you, and you are, I think, preserving them very well and making sure that they move on into the next generation's hands in good condition. At this point, I think we should take a step back and look at what we have achieved in those 65 years. First of all, when we were established in 1950, the statute that enabled the establishment of this institution was very clear in terms of its objectives. And that statute has more or less remained unchanged in that whole period, which I think in Sri Lankan terms is quite a record. There haven't been significant amendments to the Monetary Law Act in that period. And our objectives still remain the same: the control of inflation, the promotion of financial stability and banking sector financial system stability, and the thrust for a broader economic development of the whole country. That, in a nutshell, is what our objectives are, which is very clear. It's unambiguous, and I think it has kept us on the straight and narrow through some fairly challenging periods. I think there are very few central banks in the world that have gone through the sorts of events that we have been through, most notably the bomb blast, which, as you know, affected us, our physical lives of several of our colleagues and their families and such like over the years. Not to also, and that was related obviously to the civil strife that this country went through for almost 30 years. Nevertheless, I think the central bank has maintained financial stability. We have kept inflation reasonably under control. And the economic development of the country has done reasonably well, despite those challenges. And I think that is in no small measure due to the efforts of successive generations of central bankers who have stuck to their principles by and large and kept the momentum of the country moving forward. So I think it's appropriate for us to take a moment and just accept a little bit of self-congratulation at this point of time. And certainly my endeavor is to see that we promote these noble ideals and take the country and this institution to even higher heights. Now that we have peace in this country, a lot of those hurdles that the central bank faced in the last 3 decades are behind us. And we have to gear ourselves to promote those objectives of this institution in normal circumstances, relatively normal circumstances in the future. To do this, I think we have to now assess what those 3 objectives of ours mean in the broadest sense. And I think I have been reaching out to some of you over the last 6 months. First of all, when we look at the control of inflation, I think that has fortuitously been resolved by external events. You can see that in the global markets, we have falling commodity prices worldwide. The large country that has appeared in the last decade, China, has indulged in a lot of spending in the last 10 years to revive the global economy, and in the process, commodity prices shot up, which caused no small measure of problems for us. But now that spending boom is over, and as you can see, China's growth is slowing down. And as a consequence, we also benefit from falling commodity prices, and therefore our inflation is easier to control. On the financial stability front, I would say that the banking system looks in reasonably good shape. That's partly because banks have been extremely conservatively run. In the last 20, 30 years, because of the war situation, they didn't lend aggressively. More recently, we saw some of them becoming a little aggressive, and they got a bit burnt when agriculture was affected by the drought last year, and then you also saw the big exposure to gold and pawning activities, which also affected bank balance sheets slightly, not excessively. And most of those problems, however, I'm glad to say, seem to be behind us. So the banking system looks in fairly good shape. So finance companies that I think pose some concerns. I think we have far too many of them. We were probably a bit too liberal in terms of encouraging finance company growth in the last 10 to 15 years, and as a consequence, today we are coping with some unusual situations in that sector. But there again, I think, with some resolve and some out-of-the-box thinking, we will be able to bring that sector also under control. So all in all, I think, the financial system is responding favorably. We have several infrastructural challenges ahead of us. We have to make our stock markets, our bond markets, and our foreign currency market work as a market and really respond to the challenges of bringing in more participants, broadening its appeal, and becoming real instruments of channeling the savings, not only of Sri Lankans, but also of people living overseas, so that our institutions and our real businesses can benefit from those flows of financial activity and grow at a stronger pace than they have grown in the past. That is our broad challenge going forward. And at the same time ensuring that we do not allow the sort of excesses that creep in such situations which cause financial disturbances and panics. So that, I think, is going to be the challenge going forward for all of us, to establish that stability, to have a very clear set of rules. Remember that the way financial markets have evolved historically for centuries is on the basis of having a rules-based system where every player in the market, whether it's the regulator or the regulated, abides by a set of rules. And that is the most effective way for any system to function. It can't be based on the whims and fancies of the regulator or the government or any single player in the market. There has to be an even playing field. The goalposts have to be stuck very firmly in the same place, and the same rules have to apply. It's like a football game or a cricket game. You can't change the rules as you go along. That, to me, is very essential. So at the moment, we are trying to make those rules very clear to all the market players in various forms. We've already done so in most of the markets, in the foreign exchange market, in the fixed income markets, and I think our friends at the SEC are now trying to establish the rules in the equity markets. Once all that comes together, I think you will see a significant improvement in the way our entire financial sector operates, and hopefully that will be the main conduit for financing of development in the years to come. So that, I think, deals more or less with the challenges we have in the financial space and our efforts to ensure financial stability. But really, it's the third objective, which is the economic development of the country, that I would like to spend a few minutes on today. This is an area which, for various reasons, the central bank has engaged and disengaged over the years and decades. Basically, the bank, I think, took a backward step about 15 to 20 years ago, and very understandably, because that was the time when the war was raging and we had our own problems to contend with, particularly in terms of ensuring stability. And therefore, the central bank did not pursue aggressively a strategy of engaging with the rural sector and with the broad development of the entire country. We more or less stuck to our basic activities in terms of financial stability, optimization, and inflation control, and that economic development objective took a slightly backseat. I think now it is incumbent on us to really re-engage with the government, with all the social sector players, with all sorts of industry groups, agricultural groups, service sector groups, and really map the way forward on how this country can grow. When you look at the situation, it is not bad, but on the other hand, I think there's a lot of work to be done. Take, for instance, the fact that the entire northern province contributes only 4% of the total national GDP. That is simply unacceptable. We have 9 provinces in this country, and you can't have one of them only contributing 4%. That is simply unbalanced. And the opportunity we have is that in that northern province, we have 3 branches, in Trincomalee, in Jaffna, and now in Kilinochie. And there's no reason at all why we can't spur all the banking institutions in the northern province to come under our umbrella and really see that the economic potential of that region is achieved. It's very simple. We just have to see that the banking institutions and ourselves work on a coordinated basis to look at what resources that area of the country has, whether it is manpower or land that is unutilized, agricultural potential, and see that that happens. Now, I'm not saying that we should only focus on the northern province. Even the southern province, we have a branch in Matara, but I think there's a lot of work to be done. I recently visited areas around Hambantota, and I find that the potential there really is still not exploited. There are a few factories here and there, a few agricultural projects that we are funding, but we are nowhere near the sort of potential that we can achieve, particularly since so much infrastructure has been installed in that area and built in recent years. And I think that infrastructure is not being used. We have the rather comic situation today where an airport is being used to store paddy because of a mismatch of the needs of that airport to be economical with the needs of the broader economy, which has other pressing problems to be achieved. So this is a classic example of how we, I think, have to put on our thinking caps and come up with solutions for the government. One big advantage we have is that central bankers have, through the decades, manned very important government institutions. Even when I look today, institutions as varied as the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Finance, and such like, have very senior central bankers working there in some form or another. And even in the legal sector, the Attorney General's Department is working very closely with us. And I think we have a significant role to play in terms of capacity building, not just in the banking sector, but in several other sectors that are vital to the economy. And that really is the challenge that I think all of you have to remember and try and participate. I myself, when I worked in this institution several decades ago, worked in several institutions in the Ministry of Industries, in the Treasury, and it was a very enriching experience for myself personally, but I think at the same time I carried over the expertise that I had picked up in the central bank and enriched those institutions as well. So that tradition, I think, should continue. I think it is incumbent on the central bank to really use our manpower. All of you are a concentrated pool of brain power in this country. I don't think any other institution has so many qualified individuals. We have engineers, we have people from all sorts of fields, not just economics, in this institution. And I think we have to really build on those skill sets. One of the plans I have, which I'm discussing with the DGs and the AGs, is to try and deepen our skill sets. We have to identify specific skill sets which are necessary for the central bank in the first instance, and also for the broader nation, and to try and deepen those skill sets in a conscious basis so that our manpower development, what you call the improvement of our human capital, becomes much more entrenched and becomes much more integrated in terms of the national economic development effort. Just to give you an example, we don't have enough accountants in the government service. When I talk to the police, to the CID, or to the Attorney General's Department, or all these departments, they don't have accountants. They can't count. They can't, when they see a balance sheet in any corporate case, they don't know how to handle it. There's a desperate shortage of that type of manpower, partly because the accountants in this country can get much better salaries when they work for the private sector. Now, how do we bridge this gap? I think given that the central bank is a very secure service, maybe we don't pay as much as the private sector, but we certainly give security of tenure. You all get EPF and you get pensions. This sort of long-term prospect, I think, will attract good people into this institution on a continued basis. I have tried in my own way to fight with the government to get increases in wages for all of us, also reinstating the pension, and I hope that will make it much more attractive for people to work for this institution and keep you from moving away into the private sector and stay on in this institution. But in the process, we also then have to develop our skill sets and really organize ourselves, prepare ourselves for the challenges of the future. The future, I think, is going to look very different from the past in this country. We are now reaching a level of normalcy which most of us haven't ever experienced in our lifetimes. I mean, the year I joined this institution, 1983, was when the problem of the ethnic issue started, unfortunately, and it raged on for almost 30 years. So I don't think any of us have really experienced that sort of normalcy, and as a result, people are not really prepared to take on the challenges of what a normal market economy looks like. And that, I think, is really incumbent on us to define for the country, for the government, for the people, and to propagate that message. We have to be much more forceful in terms of using the media, whether it is the newspapers, the television, or the social media, to bring forward views on what we think the future of Sri Lanka will look like. Obviously, in consultation with the government, we have people, as I said, in various institutions of government who can coordinate with us to come out with a comprehensive message. And obviously, using our annual report and other publications, we can continue to project that report, that view, that map of the future, and engage with the government on how that will be achieved, while all the while stressing the need for financial stability, for the control of inflation, and for seeing that economic development takes place in an optimal manner. That, I think, is really the challenge for us. We have to imagine what the future is going to look like. And at the moment, I think this is probably the best placed institution to do that. So the challenges are ahead of us. It's not easy to change mindsets. Remember that a lot of the people of this country, particularly those who work for government, have been used to a war situation. Most of their working lives, they have been living in a war economy. And a war economy is very different from an economy at peace. That, in my view, is why you had a change of government this year, and you have a new government who is now trying to win the peace. We won the war, but it was very difficult to win the peace. Why? Because our mindsets were stuck in the past. There was that concept of control. You had to control everything in the economy, including prices. When I say prices, I mean things like the exchange rate, the interest rates, other prices, which affect the functioning of the economy. That is all justifiable in a war situation. But when you come into a peace situation where it's a normal functioning market economy, then you have to rethink. You have to get back to first principles and reassess how should the economy work in a new dispensation. That is the challenge before us. And I'm asking all of you to join in this effort to try and redefine the scope of everything we do in the central bank, to see that we reorient ourselves towards winning the peace in the broadest sense, to making the financial sector, the economy, and other types of institutions in this country work in an effective manner that can raise the growth, the potential of this economy, raise the skill levels, and most importantly, bring about that ethnic harmony, which I think has been amply demonstrated here today in terms of all religions and faiths coming together and propagating the message of peace and goodwill, and at the same time hoping for a better Sri Lanka for us, our children, and our grandchildren. So with that simple message, I thank you very much for all your efforts. I think the last 6 months for me have been a very steep learning curve, coming back and reorienting myself with this institution which is very dear to my heart. I have observed tremendous improvement in terms of several processes that were never there when I left this institution in 1993. And I find that there's still more to do. There's still more to do, but I think Sri Lanka as a country has great potential. We are geographically located in a situation, in a location which is at the center of the fastest growing population cohort globally. As you know, the last 20 to 30 years were the era of China. China grew massively because it had a very fast growing population, and also the East Asian countries around it like South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong had mounted their economic miracle by opening up their markets, throwing open their markets and making their exchange rates competitive and basically getting huge amounts of foreign investment. That model worked effectively. It is, I think, the only model that really is open for emerging markets to prosper. But now they are facing a problem. Their populations have stopped growing, so they don't have young creative workers coming into the workforce in order to make their economies continue to grow at the fantastic rates of growth that they achieved for several decades, 10, 12% rates of economic growth. So now the challenge is for the countries around the Indian Ocean, particularly the southern Indian Ocean, India, the whole SAARC region, including Sri Lanka and India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, even the Maldives in its own way. And then look at the Middle East, parts of the Middle East which are prospering, particularly the UAE and Oman and Qatar, countries like that. And then the whole of the African continent, which you may or may not know has about 1 billion people. This is almost the size of China about 10 years ago. If Africa can get going with its vast stores of minerals and other types of natural resources, then you could really see a transformation in this part of the world. This part of the Indian Ocean will really, I think, be the fastest growing region in the world in 10 years' time. But we have to be part of that. We have the head start in terms of our human capital. I think I have traveled this region intensively, and nowhere have I found the quality of manpower that you have in Sri Lanka. When I used to go to Pakistan 10 years ago, my clients used to tell me that their teachers used to be from Ceylon. We are very famous for our teachers, even in Singapore, Pakistan, all these countries. Ceylonese teachers used to go in the 60s and teach their children how to speak English, to read and write English. And there are very fond memories of this. This shows how ahead of the curve Ceylon, as it was then known, was in terms of grooming and teaching people basic skills. Singapore, for instance, most of the senior doctors in Singapore were Ceylonese who went across, people in the judicial sector. The current finance minister of Singapore, Tharman Shanmugaratnam, who's a friend of mine, his father was a Sri Lankan from Jaffna who went across, and now he's still a member of the medical faculty in the Singapore University. So we have a head start in terms of our human capital. All our people, as you know, have a hunger for education. Whether you go to the village or to the richest families in the cities, all of them have that great hunger for education. To me, that is our strength. And we, as I said, have a head start. We have better human capital resources, I would wager, on a per capita basis even than India and other countries in the region. So we can provide that real leading edge. Our people are all over the world. Wherever you go, if you look at expatriate Sri Lankans in any country, anywhere in the world. I've been to the Caribbean, to places like Barbados, even there you find Sri Lankans. And they're doing very, very well in very professional endeavors. So we have to reach out to this diaspora, as I call it, and ensure that they also come and help us. But already I think within the country, we have sufficient pool of people who really can lead the charge, not just in terms of raising Sri Lanka's profile, but also attracting foreign investment and other resources which will help this country to really provide leadership in this region in the decades ahead. So remember that. I think it's a great challenge for all of us. This institution is going to be at the epicenter of this country's efforts to develop itself. And President Maithripala Sirisena, who visited us a few weeks ago, made it very clear that his main objective is to see that people's incomes increase. Now, that is his objective. He has spelled out the objective. How do we achieve that? That's where we have to sit now and brainstorm. To me, the key challenge is how to raise productivity. Productivity is very important. Output per capita, this is a key element that we have to utilize. We have to see how we can harness the use of information technology to leapfrog a lot of the time that we have wasted in this useless war that ended 5 years ago, and try and see that we really enable ourselves to make this economy grow, leapfrog into the 21st century, start using IT and other types of skills, which will then make us a very modern economy and raise our productivity levels, which I think have lagged in the last 30 to 40 years. That, I think, is a key challenge that we should focus on, and how to achieve that really is up to you. It's your ideas that will make this happen. So thank you very much once again. I wish you all the very best for the next 65 years. I don't know how many of us will be there to be there, but I'm sure some of the very young people who have just joined the bank will certainly be there for a large measure of that time. And I think we have everything at our disposal now to achieve what I've set out. It's really up to you now to make that happen. Thank you very much, and God bless you. Thank you.